Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. I'm Joanne Shaw, owner of Down2Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host and co-author, Matthew Dressing.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. And I'm wondering if you are feeling like me about your September garden. I've been noticing that it's not quite as nice as usual. Usually in summer, you're really looking forward to a September garden with the hydrangeas and the fall colors. Well, it's looking a little sad. So we thought we would talk about some of the issues that you might be finding in your garden, just like what I have in my garden and the other gardens I walk around. What do you think, Matt?
I agree. Things aren't looking quite as fall fabulous as they
Ooh,
have in the past.
that's right. So this episode is called What's Wrong with My Garden?
That's right. So we'd love to hear what issues you are facing your gardens. Don't forget, you could write us down the garden path podcast at hotmail.com. But also, we'd love to continue the conversation on our Facebook group at Down the Garden Path Podcast is our Facebook group there where you can share our photos and other questions, tips, and advice, maybe for some of our other listeners as well about your garden. So you can interact with us more there as well.
That's right. That's right. So I think one of the biggest things and the most common, and I think probably the most typical, right, is mildew.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of powdery mildew, especially popping around. So, if you're not familiar with powdery mildew, it's that white fuzzy film that slowly takes over our leaves and/or stems on our tree, shrubs, and perennials. And it's a fungus that won't flat out kill your perennial or tree, but it definitely takes away or lowers the aesthetic value of that
Hmm.
plant in the garden. So, yeah, it's just pretty common. We'll spread it around by touching other plants. Maybe you've
Yeah.
brushed up against it out in the wild, or you've been at somebody else's garden and they have it. It's kind of out there and it's going to spread and take over with free moisture. So, long, humid days, free irrigation water. So, if you're watering or irrigating at night, we've got that free moisture that doesn't evaporate readily back into
Ah.
the environment. Like when the sun comes up and hits the morning dew, and it's there for a bit, but evaporates
Hmm.
fairly quickly. So those are the conditions where we see a lot of our powdery mildew pop around.
Lots a lack of circulation too, right? If you like, I love a really full garden. I love all my
Yeah,
plants touching. I know there's some clients who really like, space in between, but so yeah, so the fact that my peonies are like up by my hedge and under my Japanese maple and so peonies are one of the most common, and really the best thing is to cut them down. It's fine to cut them down this time of year. Definitely throw away what you're and clean up as best you can below, but it's not something that really, if it happens again, it happens again, right? Like it may not, but it's not going to kill the plant.
right, exactly. You can definitely control it. And like you said, we're disposing of the material. We don't want them to
Hmm.
be composted. And I try to, when I clean up my clients' gardens or even around my own garden when I have powdery mildew, try to do the powdery mildew don't or like clean it all at once. Don't clean a little bit of powdery mildew and then go touch something else and then come back to clean powdery mildew. Know that you're going to deal with your powdery mildew, especially if you
Good
have
point.
a heavy infection, and then disinfect your gloves. I'll put hand sanitizer on it. Rinse my gloves just with them on. Wash my gloves with soap and water just to remove it. Same thing with your tools, and disinfect your space. So yeah, just
Okay.
kind of keep sanitation in mind when you're cleaning it, or do everything else and then do that last, and then do a good thorough cleanup. But yeah,
Hmm.
I like you said, It doesn't, it's not necessarily because you have it, especially if you have it heavy this year with, we've had a cooler, we've had a more moist, especially spring and the beginning of summer. We've had some of those ups and downs. So
Hmm.
again, that's a good spot for powdery mildew to occur. But just because you have it doesn't mean it's going to infect or be as, if it does come back, it's not going to be as strong necessarily next year. But
Right.
I kind of think of it as one of those omnipresent nature or
Yeah.
garden things, right? Like you're
Yeah.
going to see mosquitoes in your garden. You may have more or less next year. You're going to
Yeah.
have powdery mildew somewhere, but you may not notice it. Or,
Yeah.
the spores are going to be moving around there, but they may
Hmm.
not infect. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's
And
definitely.
there's the things that are known for it, like peonies. I would say
Mhm.
phlox. I would say nine bark is a shrub, that burgundy shrub that can sometimes be susceptible. Just certain varieties are more susceptible than others. So I feel like there's the known things,
Yeah.
and if you do see it early in the garden, let's say, is it? I've read that milk, that actually spraying the foliage with milk, is that just a wives' tale, Matt? Have you had any luck with that?
That's so funny because we were talking about that in class just this week
Oh
as we
yeah,
brought up powdery mildew. And I have not had any positive or definitive, like I've sprayed milk and then it cures
yeah,
itself. And the idea is, yeah, that like the milk spores, it grows because it's out and it eats the other spores and stuff happens. None of my students have had it also like work for them either.
interesting.
So I don't know if it's a wives' tale or if there's conditions for it, but it's
Hmm.
definitely something I want to play with and explore for more.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Because
sure, for
and
sure.
yeah, I mean, I said something because I feel like, it's like you notice, like I'll notice that, oh, it's starting on my peony, and then it feels like, you turn around and it's like, oh, it's covered on my peony, right? Like it just goes so quickly.
Yeah.
So sometimes, but if I could just try the milk right at the beginning, it'll be interesting. So I'll have to think about that for next year. But we just really want to let you, our listeners, know that it's not you, it's not, I'm sure if you walk around the neighborhood, you're going to see people's gardens looking just as sad as yours, unfortunately, which is too bad because I feel like I always look forward to September, and I think I have a pretty good fall garden. But my garden is not looking like I wanted to. So the mildew is one. The other thing I noticed is premature browning with the leaves and flowers. My Bobo hydrangea is not usual. Even some of my, I have one side, I have three spots where I have quick fire. Everybody knows how much I love my little quick fire. And one of the three, it probably gets the most sun. But yeah, they're more brown than pink. My Bobos are all not white, they've gone brown very prematurely. And I don't I know we had like hot weather and then rain and then hot, do you think it's just that, just drying things out?
Yeah, I think it's just you said, we've had like those ups and those downs, and
Hmm.
we've had such extremes, and it's been really really wet, and then it's dried out and got really really hot, and then it got
Yeah.
really cold. Here in the GTA, the last few nights we've had like 9 and 10 degrees suddenly.
Yeah.
Um, but it was 28, and with a humidex the week before, or even that day, as it started to drop. So I think it's just the some of those seasonal stressors moving back and forth. But again, I think it also comes into like our care, like we were saying too, right?
Mm,
Are we watering and we're spreading our powdery mildew, or we see these stresses, and are we watering the
yeah.
leaves, or are we watering deep enough, or are we just watering shallow, so we're kind of adding to it, or really
Yes.
we're not kind of providing that relief to the
Yeah.
plants that they would love. So yeah, I mean, I've noticed that too. Even with my students this year, one of them commented to me that the tomatoes this year, and I noticed it on my balcony with my tomatoes, they were green for so long. Even I had like early girl this year, so it's like an earlier indeterminate
Yeah.
producing one, but they took so long to actually get the heat and the warmth, to really kind of ripen and do their
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And even now, we had that burst of warmth going into the beginning of September, and as we're really suddenly like jolting down to a cool, they're just kind of popping up, or they were starting to mature, and now we're getting cold, and the plants are taking the damage and looking
Yeah.
like a little wilty. So yeah, I think it's a lot of it's very much the ups and downs and the drought and
Yeah.
how we dealt with it at those times.
Yeah, and I
But
think that real hot at the beginning of September, like you said, I mean, I hadn't really had to water the garden because we'd had rain every few days, and it seemed to be okay. And even the lawn, I didn't really water much. And then by the time that heat came, it was like too late. Like any watering I did, like it didn't really help the hydrangeas and help anything. So yeah, so I think that the key there is to really pay attention and try to stay ahead of it. But sometimes with the weather changes so frequently, yeah,
yeah,
you know,
and it's one of the things, like you said, like whether we can't control the weather,
yeah.
right? We can control how we react to it, but there are more factors that go into, the we had that heat, but was the garden mulched, or was the soil already dry, or did you have a drier soil texture, or a looser, a sandier, siltier texture already, and then the heat swoops in and pushes everybody over their edges. So it's nothing that you can control. So don't freak out that it's happened, or that those cards were dealt to you. Maybe your
Hmm.
garden looks fabulous and you're just
Yes.
listening because you're a regular listener. But in those situations, maybe there's a few factors that feed into that plant health. So
Hmm.
it's not necessarily anything that you have done, but just be mindful that it did happen. And like we
Hmm.
always say in our book, right? Photograph, write things down, take some journal notes
Yeah.
so that, oh wait, this looks like this, and what happened? Oh yeah, last year it was. So you can take those steps to make me add a little bit more mulch, or make sure you're watering deeper just at the base of some of those more susceptible plants. So don't worry, it's nothing that you necessarily did yourself. um, yeah, it's just more that
Yeah.
there's the cards were stacked against you maybe this year in certain
Yes, yeah.
parts. So
Well, and I think maybe, and it could be me, like I was busy, so you're right. I mean, some of our listeners who might be more out in their garden more consistently, are not having that issue. So we'd love to hear
mm,
from you if whether, again, Facebook's the perfect place to share your photos, or tag us. If you post your garden on Instagram, then you can tag us and we'll take a peek. I will take a peek at some of my dilemmas. The other one we mentioned just before we went live was the echinaceas. So my coneflowers, so there's
mm.
always some like dead black ones in amongst my, I have two like really big bunches, and there's always some, but like pretty much it's the exception. Like there's no good ones. And so yeah, so I always think, oh, if I just deadheaded, and same with my bobo hydrangeas, like if I had just deadheaded, maybe I'd have some new blooms by now. But and I did try that with Bobo, but just a couple weeks ago. So I don't think there's been time for new flowers to emerge.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this show is just a bit of a reassurance. Commiserating if your garden also looks like mine. Congrats if yours doesn't, and you are very happy with your fall garden.
Yes, exactly.
And we were also talking about the smoke bush. So I've shared lots of
Oh
pictures of
yeah.
my incredible smoke bush on social. But my smoke, usually the one thing because it's Glenn's favorite, my husband's favorite tree, and it's not mine necessarily because of the smoke and because of how much of it, like, my garden's covered in tumbleweeds. But it's really hung on to its smoke this year. Is that also a weather thing, or is that just, every 5 years it holds on, it doesn't let go?
Yeah, you know what? I've seen and noticed that too, and I'm not 100% sure about that either, because I've noticed too, different places. For example, like my neighbor across the street, they have a beautiful purple smoke bush, gives a beautiful show, but this year there's really nothing much on it. But where we teach at Parkwood Estates, they have 100-year-old shrub smoke
Ooh.
bush that, yeah, and it's literally just been covered for months right from the beginning of the bloom, and it's really not doing anything. So just quickly initially, yeah, I mean, the one that's 100 years old gets full sun but is a little bit more protected, and maybe has a little bit of afternoon shade. And the other two, there's another one there on site, and it's a little bit more full sun, and it's empty, and my neighbor's is empty. So I'm not sure what's because yours, you have lots of, you said your smoke bush has lots of smoke.
Yeah, this year it
still.
had a lot of
So,
it had a lot of smoke. It seems for me, I feel like it's every other year. Last year it was okay. This year it really was quite a bit, like cotton
mm,
candy and like the kids, because I'm a corner house, but no sidewalk on my side, so everybody sees it. Any something's really spectacular when like little kids notice, right? Like little
yes.
kids are noticing that, like the fluffy tree, and different comments like that. Um,
And so
that's
maybe,
why.
yeah. And so maybe that is, and maybe, and I just haven't noted it for
Mm,
smoke bush, right? There are certain plant species that do bloom and fruit heavier every other year, or
yeah.
under a stress, right? So
Mhm.
it could just be something definitely like that, and
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
now you can kind of sell or use that as an indicator for these
Yes.
conditions, right? Oh, she does
Yeah.
it every year,
But
or
what do you do when they don't come off? Like, is it now I have to prune it? Like, is it saying, should prune it, or do you think it will get a windstorm and they'll eventually come off?
yeah, usually in that kind of case, like I'm sure, like the one at Parkwood, for example, it's just covered in them, and like yours, it's just covered in them, right? I think what we'll see is we'll see our normal fall leaf drop, and then our winter winds will come in and
Mm,
blast them away and
yeah.
push them, or even as the fall winds come with the cooler, darker days, they'll slowly be blasted off and let go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We haven't
So
had a lot of wind. That's one thing. Like I know where our temperatures have kind of fluctuated and stuff. But sometimes we get like, when we have rain, we've had like those, wind and it's blowing sideways and stuff, and we haven't really had that. So that could be a factor too. But
yeah, I've noticed that too as our in between, the wind changes between the sunny and then it gets
mhm,
cloudier. And then when it comes backwards too. Yeah, I've noticed that too. And even the winds then haven't really been as strong.
yeah.
At least in our area or my area. I was at my brother's earlier in the week on one of those cooling days, and the wind there was insane.
Oh
But
yeah.
he's like Kitchener Waterloo
Okay.
escarpment area, so he's a little higher up. But
Yeah.
maybe that was it. But yeah, it was
Interesting.
interesting. So
And same with the leaves, right? Like the leaves prematurely, like my London plane tree, my front tree, I've got like brown leaves all over the lawn already. And I've seen that kind of hit or miss when I'm driving around. I'm noticing things um
yeah, I've
dry.
noticed that especially just in like the last day or so too, right?
Mm,
Is yeah, a lot of the leaves have really started to change. And just that I say in the last day or so, because here or over here where I am in Oshawa, it's we've had some really those 9 and 10 degree nights. But even before then, like the echinacea, things are starting to turn a little easier. And a little bit of turn is good, right? We have trees and shrubs that maybe have had some heavier stress than we realize, and we can see them turn. And I often think of, a little bit of a drier or tougher spot in our garden,
yeah.
or a younger tree or shrub that's maybe on a boulevard, or even like if driving out in more of a country setting that's kind of on the like on in a ditch, or kind of just young and in a little competitive space, they'll turn a little earlier. But like you had said, we're noticing a lot that's really just suddenly turning their full color, or just browning out completely and starting to die. So, and I always think of at this time too, that's one of the things, if you're worried about your trees or shrubs, if the leaves are browning and they're falling, that's a good sign. If the leaves are turning and they're browning and they're not falling,
Ah,
that's a danger, because trees naturally close off their leaf scars. So the leaf, as they close off on the stem, they'll pinch the leaf and let them go and they'll fall. If it dies and she's closing that part of the stem, the leaf will fall. But if she's dying, that stem is dying, or there's a bigger issue, she
ah,
won't close, she won't trigger, and that leaf will stay brown and just continue to rot. So that's saying that there's damage even in the stem itself. Something's happening. So we want to see the leaves brown and fall versus brown and stay. But yeah, there's a lot of browning and falling that I've noticed,
yeah. Yeah.
and color turning. Things are blushing a lot more, and a little bit of that is definitely going to be the cooler nights,
Hmm.
right? You'll see it in your annuals, like your ivies and
Yeah.
right in your more hardier annuals. But yeah, yeah, and again, it's just kind of that weather thing, and I think a hit of huge drought. Have you any in your area? Because I know you're much further west than I am, or a good further west than I am. Uh, Anything else that maybe is you've noticed it's spurring it on, or?
No, I don't think so. I think, I mean, in the past, I've had that issue with my Japanese maples, but I'm looking, like I
Mhm.
just popped up to look at my bloodgood in the backyard, and it's doing fine. Like it's not started to dry out yet, so that is good. And my yellow one in the front has been one in the last two falls has been an early one to dry out and drop. So yeah, so it's not too bad. I think it's my London plane is the most dramatic.
Mhm.
And I am just shocked at how big those have gotten, Matt. Like honestly, how big. I never thought they'd be so big. So
Yeah,
they
your London
really
plane tree's
are,
gorgeous.
yeah, they really have grown so fast. My flowering dogwood has certainly gotten started to turn red faster than everything else, but it's holding on to its leaves. So and it still has its berries. So it's funny, I noticed the pagoda dogwood turns, it's got like the blueberries in clusters, and the birds love that. But the
Mhm.
red, I don't know if the red, it's almost like a big raspberry on the flowering dogwood, Cornus cusa, is
Okay.
a much more like a raspberry, or I would say it's got the bumps on it like a raspberry, but I would say it's almost the size of a cherry.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah.
the bird, I don't know if it's too big for the birds, but the birds don't go after it, but the chipmunks and squirrels do. So it's kind of interesting, the different delicacies at the different times of year. So yeah, so it's nice to feed the animals.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
definitely part of the garden ecosystem. I think a must have. And
Hmm.
if you're worried that you're seeing too many new things or birds or wildlife or bugs in your garden, that's a great sign. That means that, they're happy and you have a good ecosystem there. So,
Hmm.
yeah, if you don't see anybody and you've got lots of stuff, I would worry there. So, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I'd worry there that, oh, so what's off? Why
Yeah.
isn't somebody coming to see me?
Well, I wonder, curious about you, monarchs. Have you seen, like, I know you keep an eye on a patch of of milkweed near your place, and anything with the students. Like my mother-in-law is always on the hunt for monarchs, and she usually brings a couple in, into the house type to raise and make sure that they make it into adulthood, like, and it turned into a butterfly, the chrysalises and stuff. And she's traveled all over Durham looking, and she has not found any. Then she got me looking, so I haven't seen any eggs on any milkweed.
Yeah, I haven't seen very many eggs or caterpillar activity
Yeah.
in my one spot at all. And so I'm not sure what's happening there. The milkweed's happy and healthy. But I have seen a few of the monarchs out and about, especially
Okay,
like
that's good.
around garden centers. And a friend of mine, um, they know another friend who's a little further north than us, and she has a little kind of wild monarch patch that she
Okay.
keeps just for them, and she's been bringing in a number of them and bringing them to maturity and releasing them, and they've been happy and healthy. And she's noticed some other monarch, but also other butterfly
Okay.
activity on her plants. So up there, it
Good.
seems to be, yeah, things are good,
Good.
or good there. So I'm not sure if it's kind of
Pockets, yeah. Well, I was
pockets here and
wondering if
there
the
again,
issue
or
is that
again,
they didn't make it because there were so many storms in the southern US this winter, that I
yes,
wondered if the butterflies, the migratory route is huge. So I was wondering if there was just they didn't get here. And,
our little
so yeah, so
group
that
didn't got, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that'll be interesting. So one of the other things, as we, it's turning into a fun show, but I've gotten emails from clients and even my dad. I wrote it in my newsletter, my September newsletter, for anybody who subscribes to that, that a lot of people are kind of concerned about their boxwoods. And there's
Hmm.
lots of things, the industry has tried to keep it at bay, but there's lots of things happening with boxwood.
That's right. Yeah, lots of different insect pests, boxwood tree moth, um, the little adelgids that are attacking. One of the big ones being boxwood blight. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are suffering, as well as just the environmental conditions,
Hmm.
and other things that are happening to the boxwoods for sure. So, yeah, what's happening? Describe what's happening with your dad and your
Well, I
clients.
wanted you to define when you said aldehyde, what did you say?
Oh, the adelgid. It's a small
Adelgid.
insect. Yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of like an aphid-like thing that goes in
Okay.
and
Okay.
eats and bites. Yeah.
Yeah, so my dad is getting a lot of yellowing. I was showing you some pictures. Yeah, so yellowing and then defoliation. Uh, and I was worried that I think he's been pruning like a little too often, maybe. If he's listening to it, I'm sure he's gonna disagree with me. But anyway, so I felt like he's just made the problem like, maybe there was a little bit of a problem, and because he's thinking that by pruning it off, he's gonna make it better, and really he hasn't. And then my other client, Art, has been I think overwatering. So he did mention that
Mm.
this summer they've been leaving the sprinklers on. They've been going to their trailer and leaving this not an irrigation system, but an actual overhead sprinkler, um, for and it's watering the lawn and watering his gardens, which are all bordered by boxwoods. So his damage is kind of not necessarily on the outside. Like if you just look at them at a quick glance, they're still kind of green on the outside, but if you look really close and you part the leaves, then it's really brown and really curly and things inside. So I asked him to stop watering.
Mm.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Yeah, it sounds like there's just some water damage,
Water
some
issue?
trapped water issue in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's good that they're still green because the boxwood like well-drained soils and they don't really withstand constantly moist soils.
Yeah.
So that's good that she's still green. So yeah, probably just some moisture in there causing some issues and some
Okay.
internal leaf drop. So hopefully it
Yeah.
doesn't migrate outside.
Right. And I did recommend mulching too, because I've read that adding some mulch to the base, one helps with the mildew and the spores and the
Hmm.
insects, and then would also keep it, the soil more moist so they don't feel like they have to, so there's not that dry out, wet, overwater, dry out, overwater. Because that's the thing,
Right.
like irrigation systems, I should have asked him about what time, because at least irrigation systems, I know there's potential for over irrigating or under irrigating, but the fact that they go on typically right in the middle of the night or in the middle early mornings, right? But
Yeah.
if his sprinkler's going off at like 9 in the morning or something, and it's just sitting there, then that's a little bit different too. So I will follow up with him.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk a bit about blight? So you said there was actually some really specific identifiers.
Yeah, boxwood blight is a brutal one. We had appear here. I'm trying to remember when we first saw it, but a number of years ago. And boxwood blight will show up and very quickly defoliate and kill lots of boxwoods. Like it'll wipe your established boxwood hedge out within a year. It'll just kill it
Okay.
out. Yeah. So initially, what happens is we start to see some blotching on the leaf. So some leaf spots, some irregular leaf spots where we'll kind of see darker brown or like a ringed brown or lighter brown, almost like a water spot. So there's a dark spot and it kind of fades outwards. And so these little lesions, they're starting to see on the top, we'll start to see, but then underneath, we'll start to see some spores. So, like the white fuzzy mold. So
Okay.
the
So you would
stain will
actually
go,
see like almost like mildew.
yeah, almost like a little mildew appearance to it underneath the leaf. And then what'll happen is that the lesions will just start to spread. And what you'll get is um, almost it's not the single spot anymore. It'll just be like half the leaf will die, or like from the tip up, or just from like a side over, it'll start to die. And then you can eventually you'll start to see other stem lesions. So on young green growth, what we'll see is just some of those darker irregular spots happening, or on some older boxwood growth, we'll get to see some of the raised, bubbly, darker lesions, or even just some wooded lesions. It just kind of looks like a weird woody growth, and those are the spores and the disease doing their
Okay.
thing as well.
Is the
So
woody growth on the stem, like on the
it'll
branching?
yeah, it'll be on like the thicker, woodier stem, the kind of the finger length or the finger width or pencil width type thing, and
Oh.
they're just those raised bunches and lesions, and they usually have some dark color, but they may not necessarily have dark color as well. So it'll
Hmm.
be kind of more of like a warty outgrowth with some
Okay.
discoloration sometimes as well.
And is
And
there anything we can spray? Is there any treatment for boxwood blight?
that I know of presently, no.
in Canada. I think there are
In
some, chemicals possibly in the US, but
in
I know
Cam
in
right.
Canada.
In Canada, no. In the United States, I'm sure there are regular systemic um, fungicides and other sprays that
Right,
are way above and beyond what we ever see here in Canada. For Canada, unfortunately, because of the pesticide ban, we do just have to remove infected material.
right,
And the spores are very virulent. So they will spread out to a radius of 50 feet. They are 15 feet, not 5015 feet. So where you might have a hedge running through, there's going to be a 15-foot radius in all directions that the spores may be hiding. So if you love boxwoods and you're going to replant boxwoods,
yeah,
unfortunately, that's not going to be a good thing for you because the
yeah.
surrounding material will just reinfect. So you're going
Hmm.
to want to do some other boxwood like um, hedging replacements. And I often think of like the strong box holly, that sort of thing. It's native, it has a boxwood like leaf.
Hmm.
Um, and again, it's evergreen, but
Yeah.
yeah, or going to like a yew
A
hedge
yew
because
hedge, my favorite.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And just like the boxwood, the yew as well will take a full sun to full shade. It
Hmm.
tolerates things very similar, likes well drained soil, but not constantly moist. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. And then the other thing about boxwood is the tree moth. So
mhm.
in the end, does the damage look the same or is it I mean, aside from they're actually I mean, the moth is pretty tiny, but the caterpillar is pretty big.
Yeah. The caterpillar is fairly large and will start to defoliate huge sections
Yes.
and eat the boxwood just whole. And you'll notice it usually more than the boxwood
Yeah.
blight, right?
And that's like May, June when it starts. Like, isn't there like a feeding time?
Yes, and it is earlier in the season. So right
Hmm.
now you might have sections that have been eaten away or that look dead, or suddenly there's a new pile of growth. But earlier in the season, we should have seen some of the caterpillar damage
Hmm.
for sure. And
Hmm.
then now it's just kind of watching, or hopefully you were able to trap some or
Yeah.
treat them for it. Yeah, so
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
might have some damage now that hopefully will regrow. Um, but next year we're going to want to watch for sure.
Watch for it for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the caterpillars are quite large and like lime green colored. And then the moth is white with a brown border,
Mhm.
is what
Yes.
I've read
Right.
about it. And I know there's been some people online saying, "Oh, well, I'll get rid of my boxwoods because I don't want to use pesticides or insecticides or pesticides, I guess, in my garden." But the actual treatment for that um, it's a more of a bacteria, right? It's the BTK, which if anybody remembers when we talked about the LDD moths,
Yes.
it's the same kind of thing. So it's more of a bacteria that when the caterpillars eat it, they die. So is it so like if let's say your boxwoods are really healthy for our listeners who have really healthy boxwoods, do you think would you like proactively, like is it a preventative?
You could again spraying it at the time that the larva's out because the BTK usually lasts about 4 to 7 days
Okay.
before the bacteria just dry out and die on your plant. Yeah, and then they ingest it and it'll kill them and they'll just fall off. Yeah, so you could try it as a preventative, if especially if you know that you have it in the area or they're somewhere nearby. You could definitely spray it as a
Okay.
preventative, just as you know they're active in your area for
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they've just recently, like Landscape Ontario and the government, we've been watching it, and Etobicoke has kind of been the first place where they showed up, the moth, and they've been kind of watching it and trying to keep it in Etobicoke and telling everybody, if you see it somewhere else, let us know. And then my client in Whitby had it this year, and then I've seen other people, say the same thing. So it's kind of like we kept it contained. That's why you could never return, even as a wholesaler, we
Yeah.
couldn't return our boxwood. If you like, boxwoods are always final sale, there's no returning it. They were quarantined at most growers, just trying to keep, there were lots of things in place trying to control this.
Mhm.
um, because it's a popular crop. And I think of, like, in the city, I think of in the more affluent neighborhoods downtown, right, they're just
Mhm.
covered with like 40-year-old boxwood.
Yeah. Exactly.
So,
So definitely take a look, because they do also overwinter in a larval stage. So there's like the generation. So the main
oh,
feeding is
okay.
in the spring.
Okay.
And then just check now, because now is they'll go to sleep and there'll be little webs. So if you take a look at your box, but if you're worried and you see some eating, take a look just where some of the leaves, and you might see just kind of like two little leaves folded together, or and a little bit of webbing. Those are the
Okay.
very, very, very young
Oh,
guys that might be trying to overwinter, or have moved in
okay.
into
So
your
can we do
space.
BTK now? Or no,
Yeah,
because they're not really eating, right?
right now is kind of they're asleep, so they're more active, like just as they hatch. Which you again, unless you're really looking, you won't
Right.
see them. But the main time is yeah, like starting in March, depending on where you warm up, and in
Hmm.
through
Hmm.
the spring to early summer, where you can. BTK works great for them.
Now,
Yeah.
what about dormant spray? Because I know there's that kills a lot of insects, right?
It does and I love using it for overwintering things. The eggs are laid in the leaf, but with that web, you may not get um,
Contact.
contact enough that it'll happen.
Mm.
Yeah, you might disturb the webbing that you let some winter into it, and they die, but
Hmm.
they're also going to freeze solid and as their little caterpillar form or larval form and
Right.
still survive. So
Right. Okay.
yeah, so now kind of just look for a little bit of that webbing, but in the
Hmm.
spring as you warm up, definitely watch for those little green caterpillars with the
Mm.
black heads, and then they mature
Yeah.
into, like
Oh,
you said, the brown stripes, and they
yeah.
they will
I
just
was shocked at how
completely
big
destroy.
they got. Oh
They're
my.
huge. Yeah,
They're
they're quite big.
huge.
They're quite
Yeah,
big.
they are.
You wouldn't think such a thing
Yeah.
would. Yeah.
So some of my research also, just popping back to blight, was the recommendation that we
Mm,
stop trimming the boxwoods during the season, that actually the best time to trim it would be when it's dormant. And I know we're all often telling people like not to trim it too late, like you wouldn't trim now because you don't want to encourage new growth. But I
mhm.
don't know that people would think to do it in, let's say, November or March, when really the plant is dormant.
Yeah, once she goes to sleep for that winter, she should be, you won't really stimulate the growth. She's changed
Right.
her mind. It's
Okay.
just too cold. But yeah, often, yeah, early March or late March, that late winter kind of period, giving her a light shear when spores are inactive. There's no free moisture. It's all locked up in drying winds, or sorry, locked up in snow or ice. And then we
Hmm.
have the drying winds is a good time to do it too. Again, I would still say if you're worried that you do have it, again, sanitation. Um,
Yeah.
you don't want to cut through it. Take the tools into a warmer spot, let the spores slowly warm up, or still be dormant there, and then go out in the growing season and do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can definitely do it then to remove it, um, shape your trees and or your shrubs, or your topiaries, whatever you end up having. Yeah, that's a good point. A good point.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
a good point.
Yeah. So if you have boxwood questions, you know where you find us, right, Matt?
That's right. Yeah, you could definitely find us on our Facebook group at Down the Garden Path Podcast is our handle there. Same for Instagram at Down the Garden Path Podcast. We'd love for you to interact with our posts, or on Facebook as well. Post your boxwood. Maybe you have an issue you're not sure of that we can help out with you, or help you out with.
Hmm.
But we'd also love to hear from our listeners. What are you growing? What's exciting? What's happening in your garden? What's happening in your garden? Is it looking like our gardens are right now with the crazy September weather?
Hmm.
So definitely let us know, and we'd love to hear from you there as well. So thank you for joining
Yes.
us on this episode of Down the Garden Path. I'm Matthew Dressing, here with my co-host and co-author Joanne Shaw. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from our research and from the guests that have joined us on the show.
That's right. And don't forget you can spend time with us on Down the Garden Path. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Yes, our show is available at the garden at Down the Garden Path podcast on YouTube. You can also find us on your favorite podcast provider. And while you're there, please hit subscribe so that you'll be notified of new content. I know our schedule, we're just working out our new schedule of posting, so we hope to be a little bit more consistent as we transition from the radio show to the podcast only. So thank you for hanging in there with us. So we love hearing from you, our listeners, and you can always write us at downthegardenpathpodcast@hotmail.com or via our websites. And you can find me at down2earth.ca with the number 2, and Matt at naturalaffinity.ca. So we thank you for your support.
That's right. And we'll see you next time.
That's right. Thanks for joining us down the garden path.